The chandeliers above the Grand Hall in Geneva shimmered like they were holding court of their own, casting fractured light across polished marble and the faces of people who believed they ran the world. I stood among them, the muted hum of string music threading through the clink of crystal glasses. My dress was understated deep navy, cut clean, and my hands rested loosely around a champagne flute I had no intention of drinking. I am Mackenzie Barnes. At least, that's the name printed on my diplomatic credentials. But in this room, in my father's voice, I was something much smaller. "There she is," Ambassador Gregory Stanton announced, pulling me forward with a sweep of his arm, as though I were part of the decor. He clapped a hand on the shoulder of the tall man beside him. "Admiral Reed, meet my daughter, just a translator. Keeps us from turning these tedious talks into shouting matches." A ripple of polite laughter brushed past me, and I felt my father's pride. It wasn't for me, but for his own performance. The Admiral offered a curt nod before his attention slid elsewhere, the dismissal sharp and clean. My father had successfully folded me into the background. If he had looked closer, he might have noticed my eyes weren't scanning the room for small talk. They were tracing security gaps, cataloging exits, assessing the rhythm of movement like a chess player reading a board mid-game. He might have noticed how I shifted my stance, not from discomfort, but from readiness. He didn't notice. Neither did the Admiral, but someone else in this room had noticed me, and in less than 5 minutes, my so-called translation work would have nothing to do with words, only with saving a man's life, before the sound of a single shot could silence the music. 2 worlds. That's what I'd been living in for years, one so polished and rehearsed, it could pass for a family holiday card, and another built on encrypted files, black coffee, and decisions that couldn't be undone. In my father's world, I was a decorative extension of his resume. I'd grown up under his roof in Arlington, trained in the art of polite smiles and carefully timed silences. Every public appearance with him felt choreographed, when to stand just behind his right shoulder, when to lean in with a whisper that looked like deference, when to vanish altogether so his spotlight could burn without obstruction. In my other world, my name was never spoken in public. Inside secure facilities, I was Oracle, a Tier 1 intelligence asset, trusted with patterns and fragments no algorithm could untangle without human instinct. That life had its own rules. Precision was oxygen. A wrong call wasn't embarrassing, it was lethal. I learned early that my survival depended on keeping those 2 worlds from colliding. My father didn't just underestimate me, he depended on the version of me that wouldn't challenge him. The version who was, at most, a helpful accessory. That fiction was his armor, and it suited me fine, until it didn't. I remember a Christmas dinner 3 years back, our home glowing under soft lights and the scent of rosemary and roasted turkey. My father raised his glass to toast my brother's latest real estate deal, drawing out each detail as though he'd personally orchestrated the transaction. When the applause died, I mentioned quietly that I'd received a commendation from the Director of National Intelligence for a project that had prevented an attack overseas. He patted my hand, smiling like I'd just recited a charming anecdote. "Lovely, darling. A little plaque for your desk." Then he turned back to my brother, asking about zoning permits as though the world wasn't safer because of what I'd done. It wasn't just dismissive, it was tactical. In his mind, if I stayed small, he stayed in control. But the chatter I'd been tracking in the weeks before Geneva wasn't going to respect his illusions. If it played out, it would shatter both worlds. I couldn't let that happen, not to the Admiral, not to the room full of power brokers, and not to the fragile barrier that kept my father's ignorance intact. That night in Geneva, I wasn't there for my father's performance. I was there because my other life demanded it, and this time, there would be no hiding it. 6 days before Geneva. The first thread appeared a faint digital pulse, buried deep in a cluster of unrelated intercepts. To anyone else, it would have looked like background noise. but I'd been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the smallest ripple pointed to the deepest current. For 72 hours straight, I sat in a secure facility outside Langley, my eyes bouncing between 5 monitors, running linguistic forensics on fractured transmissions in 3 different languages. Each fragment was like a shard of glass, useless alone, dangerous together. Slowly, the pattern emerged: a convergence of travel routes, falsified credentials, and a shadow identity we'd been hunting for 2 years. Protocol said the intelligence was too thin to flag. My section chief, a man who valued instinct as much as data, looked at me across the chilled glow of our workroom. "If you're sure," he said, "get yourself in the room." Getting there required a cover no one could challenge. I filed for a spot on the State Department's language support team, citing rare fluency in the dialect of an admiral's foreign counterpart. It was irrefutable. Within 24 hours, my name was on the delegation roster. When my father saw it, he sent me a 2-line email: "Nice to see you're getting a free trip out of this. Try to enjoy the Alps." He had no idea I just placed myself on the chessboard. The night before departure, my section chief called on a secure line. His voice was low, deliberate. "Whisper protocol is in effect. Clearance Sigma 7. If you confirm the threat, you act. No waiting for layers of approval. Your word is the order." It was the kind of authority that came with a weight most people never felt in a lifetime. Flying into Geneva, my father chatted about cocktail receptions and photo ops. I spent the hours reviewing threat profiles on a shielded tablet, mapping lines of sight from the main reception hall, committing the layout to memory. In his mind, I was tagging along on his trip. In reality, he was walking into my operational theater, and in less than a week, one of us would learn the cost of underestimating the other. The Palais Garnier in Geneva didn't just host receptions, it staged them. That night, the marble floors gleamed under the sweep of crystal chandeliers, and the air carried a heady blend of cologne, champagne, and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. For my father, it was a playground. For me, it was a hunting ground. I moved one step behind him, the position he preferred, watching as he worked the room with a performer's precision handshakes, perfectly timed laughs, the subtle angling of his body to keep himself in the center of every photograph. But my attention was never on him. I was running a silent sweep, eyes tracking servers weaving through the crowd, noting who carried trays with ease and who seemed to think about each step. I measured the gaps between security patrols, the timing of their rotations, and the blind spots created when guests crowded too close to the gilded pillars. Then my father spotted his prize. "Admiral Reed," he called, his voice booming just enough to draw nearby eyes. He gripped the Admiral's shoulder with practiced warmth and yanked me forward. "And this is my daughter, Mackenzie," he said, smiling toward the Admiral like he was offering a novelty. Just the translator. The words barely reached me. I'd already seen him. Near the far archway, a man in a crisp white jacket stood with a tray of champagne. His stance was wrong, too square, too balanced on the balls of his feet. His eyes weren't scanning for empty glasses. They were fixed on the Admiral, adjusting with each step the older man took. The intel packet had been clear early 40s, medium build, a faint scar under the left ear. From across the room, I caught all 3. The tray in his left hand was steady. His right hand began to slip into his jacket. I didn't think. I moved, sliding between my father and the Admiral. I pitched my voice low and sharp, the sound of command stripped of any courtesy. "Admiral, whisper protocol, Sigma 7, call sign Oracle. We move, now." The change in his face was instant, a flash of recognition, the tightening of a jaw trained for orders. We took the first step together. And then the shot rang out. The sound wasn't a deafening crack, but a muted thunk, the kind that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. A marble column 2 feet from where Admiral Reed had been standing erupted in a puff of pale dust. A neat hole punched dead center. The Admiral didn't flinch. Neither did I. Training had burned the instinct to freeze out of us both. We kept moving, weaving through startled guests whose laughter had curdled into gasps. My left hand hovered just above the Admiral's arm, not guiding, just close enough to react if he faltered. In my earpiece, a clipped voice barked, "Oracle has the principal. Perimeter lock in progress. Behind us." I caught a glimpse of my father. His expression was frozen mid-smirk, the corners of his mouth caught between confusion and dawning horror. He'd heard the call sign. He understood enough to know it wasn't a role I'd borrowed. Two security agents in dark suits fell in at our sides, their movements smooth and deliberate, their eyes scanning the crowd. Another pair closed off the path behind us. The music had stopped. The hall was no longer a reception, but a controlled zone. We slipped through a service corridor, the air cooler and metallic with the scent of polished steel and fluorescent lighting. Only when we reached the reinforced door to the secure wing did the Admiral finally speak. "Barnes," he said quietly, "you just saved my life." I met his gaze. "Sir, we're not out yet." Inside the secure room, the lighting was harsh, the air conditioning a steady hum. Analysts and security personnel moved like a well-rehearsed drill team, their eyes flicking up at us before returning to screens and comms panels. The Admiral stepped aside, allowing the team to begin their work. I removed my earpiece and passed it to the lead agent, already replaying the image of the shooter in my mind angle of approach. Escape routes, the way his jacket had shifted when he drew. Somewhere out there, the man was still moving, and somewhere outside that steel door, my father was standing in a room where his title meant nothing, realizing for the first time that the daughter he'd dismissed as just a translator was the reason he and a 4-star admiral were still breathing. The debriefing room was all hard edges, steel table, straight-backed chairs, the faint antiseptic tang of filtered air. A wall of monitors glowed along one side, each displaying a different camera angle from the reception. I stood at the head of the table, walking the crisis response team through what I'd seen, my voice steady, each detail laid out like pieces on a grid. "Entry point here," I said, indicating a doorway on the screen. Target maintained visual on Admiral Reed for approximately 90 seconds before hand drifted to concealed position. No interaction with guests, no attempt to blend beyond uniform. Pens scratched across notepads. No one interrupted. The Admiral leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching with the focus of a man cataloging every word. It wasn't a superior's scrutiny, it was the look of someone who knew their survival had depended on what I'd noticed. A knock at the door broke the rhythm. It opened just enough for a shadow to fill the frame. My father. He stepped inside as though the authority that opened doors for him in every embassy in the world would work here too. Mackenzie. Before he could get further, a CIA security officer moved between us. "Sir, this is an active debriefing. I'll have to ask you to wait outside." My father's brow furrowed. "I am Ambassador Stanton." "This is my ambassador." Admiral Reed's voice cut through, calm but with the weight of command. "Your daughter just prevented an international incident. Give her space to finish her work." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. My father's eyes flicked to me, something unsteady in them, questions he couldn't form, realizations he didn't want to face. He backed out of the room without another word. The door closed, the lock engaging with a soft click. I turned back to the table, to the team that knew me not as someone's daughter, but as Oracle. We picked up where we'd left off, mapping the shooter's exit path, setting in motion the layers of pursuit that would ripple through agencies before dawn. My father would never be invited into this room again, and I had no intention of stepping back into his. 6 months later, the memory of Geneva still played in my mind, not as a source of adrenaline, but as a pivot point. Life had shifted on that marble floor, and the ripples hadn't stopped. The glass walls of the Global Operations Center at Langley reflected a different life than the one my father had curated for me. Banks of massive screens displayed satellite feeds, live threat maps, streams of encrypted chatter. From my office, I could see the entire floor analysts moving with purpose, conversations clipped and efficient, every action tied to something bigger than ourselves. The plaque outside my door read, Director, Predictive Threat Analysis Division, my team. That morning, I was briefing the CIA director and a Joint Chiefs liaison on a developing situation in the South Pacific. My voice didn't waver. I didn't look for approval. Every person in the room understood that when I spoke, I wasn't filling air, I was moving pieces that would save lives. No one patted my hand. No one called my work lovely. They just listened. After the meeting, I lingered by the window, watching the winter light stretch across the Virginia woods. My desk phone buzzed an email notification from an unfamiliar account. The subject line read dinner. It was from my father. The message was short. He'd be in D.C. next month and wanted to see me, to understand. I read it twice. Years ago, I might have imagined this moment as some kind of vindication, but standing there, the hum of operations all around me, I felt nothing sharp, no craving for his acknowledgement. I archived the email, not out of anger, but because my validation no longer came from his approval. It came from the trust of the people who knew what I could do and the knowledge that, when it mattered, I had acted without hesitation. My father still thought my job was to interpret for powerful men. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I gave powerful men a reason to listen. The following spring, Geneva felt like a lifetime ago, yet its shadow still stretched over everything. I hadn't spoken to my father since that night. Our worlds had split cleanly, like glass scored with a perfect blade. Some evenings, when the operations floor quieted and the blue light from the monitors dimmed, I would walk the perimeter, watching my team work. They were the kind of people who measured worth not by titles or family names, but by results, by the lives still breathing, because of what we'd done. That was the family I'd chosen. One night, I found myself alone in my office, the blinds half closed against the setting sun. My reflection in the glass was layered over the threat maps still glowing behind me, a reminder of both the woman my father thought he knew and the one he never bothered to see. I thought about that moment in the reception hall, the instant when the Admiral's eyes recognized my call sign, and everything shifted. It wasn't just about saving him. It was about proving, to myself more than anyone, that I didn't need permission to exist in my own right. There would always be people like my father who saw only the outline they'd drawn for you, and there would always be moments when you could choose to step outside it. Geneva had been my moment. I didn't need his dinner invitation to rewrite the story. I'd already done it the night I walked the Admiral out of the line of fire. Somewhere in that city, under those same chandeliers, another reception was probably taking place, another polished smile, another clink of glass. But the next time someone introduced me as just a translator, I knew exactly how I'd answer, not with an explanation, not with proof, but with action, because when you've already changed the ending once, you don't waste time convincing anyone of the first chapter. And in my world, that's the only translation that matters. When I look back on Geneva, I don't just remember the sound of the silence shot or the dust blooming from the marble column. I remember the moment after, when the Admiral moved without hesitation, when the security cordon closed, and when my father's eyes finally saw me for something other than a shadow. But the truth is, I didn't act to change his opinion. I acted because it was my job, my responsibility, and my choice. That was the night the two worlds I had been balancing could no longer stay apart. And only one of them survived. In the months since, I've led operations that will never make headlines, yet I know the lives they've preserved. I've built a team that trusts my judgment, not my title. And I've learned the quiet satisfaction of knowing I can stand in any room, in any crisis, without needing someone else's validation to belong there. The email from my father still sits in my archive, unopened since that day. Sometimes I think about reading it, but I never do. It's not anger, it's clarity. I no longer need to bridge the distance between us. I have my own ground now. He once told the world I was just a translator. In a way, he wasn't wrong. I translate chaos into order, danger into safety, and silence into decisions that matter. But I do it on my terms, in a language he never learned. And if there's one thing Geneva taught me, it's this: you don't have to rewrite someone else's script about you. You can walk off their stage entirely and build your own. That's not revenge. That's freedom. And it's the only ending I'll ever need.